Hey mamas, and welcome to episode 4 of the Rooted Home Life podcast. I am so excited to get a chance to sit down today with Carrie De Francisco of Coffee with Carrie over on Instagram. She is the author of Just Breathe and Take a Sip of Coffee, Homeschooling in Step with God. She has a podcast. I am so excited to sit and chat with her today all about the importance of rest being built into our homeschools and more specifically, simplifying our homeschools. So join me today as I sit down with Carrie De Francisco to glean from her wisdom as a mama who has graduated to homeschoolers. Hi, Carrie. Thank you so much for agreeing to join me today.
You bet. I'm super excited. I loved our previous conversation, so I'm excited to talk to you again.
Yes, I got to talk to you last week for your podcast, which I'm super excited about. And I am so happy because I've actually been thinking about you all day. I've been thinking about your book all day, but I'll share about that in a minute. For everyone who doesn't know you, can you just share a little bit about yourself, your family, your experience with homeschooling, and any other fun stuff that you want to tell us?
Ooh, fun stuff. Well, thank you again. I'm really excited about your new podcast too. So thank you for having me be a guest on it. So I appreciate it. But a little bit about me. I'm married to my husband. I think we're going on year 29 this coming November, and we have 2 kids. They're both adults now. My daughter's 25 and my son is 21. We homeschooled both of them. Pretty much been homeschooling the whole time. And now that my son graduated a couple of years ago, I took off the homeschooling mom hat and put on the retired homeschooling mom hat. And that's been like 4 years now. So I've been still in the trenches, but just kind of hanging out and helping moms like yourself get started or keep going. Or my favorite is to help them do the high school years. I love helping
Yes.
moms do that.
Yes, I'm so glad that you brought that up because I was just going to say I appreciate so much hearing from homeschool moms that have seen the process all the way through. Like, you know what it is. You're not just starting out. I love walking alongside moms that are in the same place as me too, but it is like priceless to be able to hear from and learn from moms who have walked this road. So I'm so excited that the first group of moms that I'm having on the podcast are moms that can, like, we can trust, right, to like give us good advice. And I love your podcast so much, especially the fact that you focus on high school in there, because I have a senior currently, which is like, even as I'm saying it, doesn't feel real. But I also have a 13-year-old, and then I have 3 more that will be, eventually be high schoolers. And I feel like I get a lot of questions about high school. And I'm like, guys, I don't feel really equipped to give a ton of advice about it because I haven't finished it yet. So, like, I can tell you what we're doing. I can't promise you the outcome because I haven't finished. So, thank you so much for sharing that wealth of knowledge. Um,
Well, I
so,
wouldn't say it's a wealth of knowledge. I love to share with moms what not to do.
I mean, I feel like that's a wealth of knowledge too, though, right? Like,
It's a different kind of knowledge, that
yeah,
is
it's like
true.
telling us, don't do this. I tried this and it did not work. Do not make this mistake.
Yep.
And what's cool about it is I got to meet you in person at Wild and Free,
Mhm.
not this last spring, but the spring before in San Luis Obispo, which is beautiful. And I'm
Yeah.
jealous that you live in California. But so while I was there, I got a chance to get my hands on your book in person. So I do feel a little special about that. Just Breathe and Take a Sip of Coffee, Homeschool in Step with God. And what I love about this is that you focus so much on simplifying your homeschool, which is I feel like it's something that can be thrown around a lot. And I feel like it can be easier said than done, especially as we're bombarded with so much. But before you really start talking about the simplification process, you talk about Sabbath. So could you share a little bit about, like, maybe there's someone who's never heard of Sabbath or maybe doesn't know what you specifically mean when you talk about it. Could you share a little bit about that?
Thank you so much for asking me that question, because I absolutely love talking about the idea of incorporating Sabbath into not just our lives, but into our homeschooling as well. So I spend the entire first section of the book talking about that. So when I do talk about Sabbath, I look at it from a biblical perspective where Sabbath can be rest, where you literally are doing you're inactive and you're giving your mind, your body a complete and total rest. But Sabbath can also be doing a joyful, peaceful, restful activity. And so I take that approach looking at it from both of those when I talk about Sabbath schooling. So what we did in our family for Sabbath schooling is we definitely incorporated like a Sabbath hour in our day. Now we had to work up to an hour, especially when the kids were little. So even if you just are intentional about taking just 10 minutes a day to rest, to put the formal stuff away. If you have a baby or toddler, they do take a nap. The older ones can read or do something restful and quiet. Me, we go and we actually rest. We don't catch up on our emails or scroll our phones or get dinner ready. We're literally doing whatever it is that fills our cup for that 10 minutes, that 20 minutes. And it's real important to do that each and every day, because if you don't, you're going to get burned out. And then the second part that I talk about is, of course, taking a day of Sabbath, which a lot of us do. And that's our day that we worship and we spend time with our family, even more time with our family and our church family. But I'm also talking about considering maybe doing a 4-day schedule or a 4-day week instead of a 5-day week. So therefore, you kind of build in this margin so that when things come up, good or bad, you have the opportunity to do those things. Or if it's one of those weeks and you need to take time to rest, however that looks like for you, you've got that built into your schedule. So that's another way that I talk about Sabbath. And then the third way is actually this actually saved my sanity and I think my marriage. But we started doing where we would work hard for 6 weeks with our formal lessons, whatever that looked like for us, whatever season it was. But then the 7th week, we would take off. And so we applied the principle of Sabbath that way. And it wasn't a week where we caught up on things. It was actually a week that if our bodies needed to rest, we did. We took the week off physically from everything. Or it was maybe we went on a mini little trip, or we went on some extra play dates or field trips. We just did things that were restful, that gave us an opportunity to take a break from the formal of the schooling and to actually take a break. And so at the beginning of each year, I would plan out on our calendar, we'll do our school stuff for about 6 weeks, and then the 7th week we'll take off. And then I planned another 6 weeks, and I wasn't dogmatic about it. So it was like 7, 8 weeks, kind of in there, but we made it an intentional decision to take that time off. And the best analogy I could think of is, how when you let the dishes sit overnight for too long and then all the food is crusty on it, and you could sit there and you could scrub and scrub and scrub and it's not gonna work, right? All that extra effort. Or you could just let them soak overnight. And then in the morning, when you come back, everything has softened. Everything has started to dissolve on its own. And then there's less work involved to get that crusty food off. And so I kind of look at the Sabbath, especially the Sabbath week, like that it gives us a week to just kind of soak in and marinate in the things that we've been learning, so that when we get back to the formal stuff, our brains kind of reboot. And it always happened. We would come back and whatever we were struggling with in math or reading or spelling, all of a sudden the light goes on. And I really think it was because we took the time to just kind of step back and to rest and relax and then get back to it later. Scrub those dishes, but it'll be a lot easier after the Sabbath break is over.
Oh, I love that example. And I love that we're talking about Sabbath because it's so timely, even just for me. So I think when I spoke with you last week, I shared with you that we were away for a week with family, and it was a really restful week, and it was beautiful. It truly did feel like a Sabbath. But then it's like,
but then
I'm up for it. I made up for all that rest by
Mhm.
really like pushing the brink last week. And like I had so many things to do, and some weeks are like that, but it really was a lot. And even up until yesterday, and my husband looked at me yesterday and said, "So when is your Sabbath?" And I hate when he asks me questions like that because I know it's a rhetorical question and I know he's right. And I was like, that's a good question. And I'm thinking to myself, not today because I have too much to do, right? And I have to tell you, after that conversation, I felt so tired, like painfully tired, almost to the point where I was like, okay, God, like that was you asking me that question. And now I'm feeling how completely tired and run down I am from 1 week of pushing the brink. So I was like, yeah, I still don't know when I'm going to have a Sabbath though, because I got a lot to do. Like it was painful. So my husband took the kids to the pool and I texted him and I was like, I really feel like I should be at the pool with you guys. I feel so tired. I feel like I need to just go to sleep at this point. I feel so discouraged. So this morning, I mentioned this to you when we were talking earlier, but my 5-year-old asked to call my father and to come get him. He loves my dad so much. And he was like, can you call Poppy and come to get me? And I'm like, I don't think he's gonna come get you, but we'll call him. Well, he asks anyway, because that is my 5-year-old. And they invited us to the lake. And so I texted my husband and I said, well, to answer your question, I think today is my Sabbath. So it was really like, it was a game changer. We were only there for half the day. So I like how you
Mhm.
talked about how like different increments of Sabbath and how
Mhm.
important they are and being intentional about them, because I had a whole list of things for us to tackle today. Like we need to tackle the house, my boys needed to tackle the lawn, I had stuff to take care of. We were meeting and I was like, you know what? No, like we're going to go rest. And how you said it doesn't have to be physical rest. That's how I felt. I actually felt like I don't need physical rest. I actually want to move my body in a restful way. So I got to paddleboard and just like look at the birds and the trees and the water and the fish and all of that, because a lot of the work I've been doing has been like on my phone or computer. So I didn't
Mhm.
feel like I needed to sit still, but I did feel like I needed rest. So I just love how this conversation is such perfect timing. In regard to simplifying our homeschools, though, would you say then that Sabbath is foundational in order to simplify your homeschool?
Yeah, that's why the whole first section is about talking about different ways to look at Sabbath and different ways to take a Sabbath, because you really can't truly start simplifying until you truly rest in the Lord. And that's what Sabbath is all about. When you look at all the different times in the Old Testament that the Lord, um, you know, commanded them to take a rest and to give the land a chance to rest and to give families a chance to rest. It was always with and one of the reasons why, and I talk about it in the book, that I did my planning for the following week on Fridays. I called it the double portion principle, because even when the Sabbath was coming up, the Lord promised he would provide that on, the day before the Sabbath, he was going to send enough manna and food for 2 days, and that would be the time it wouldn't spoil, right? And so the Lord will provide, and he's trying to teach us to lean on him and to trust in him, and that these things are gonna get accomplished. The things he deems important to be accomplished in our homeschooling. And I really feel like we can't truly start to simplify until we actually learn to truly trust the Lord and lean on him. And I even talk about in that first section about how there were a couple of times we took sabbatical years, where
Mm-hmm.
we took a sabbatical the entire year from any kind of formal learning. But I like to say that those were my lean and glean years. Just like the land had to fallow, and the
Yeah.
Lord said, don't plant a thing. Just trust me, and all the fruits from your past 6 years, they will come up, and that is what you will glean, and that is what you will lean on, and that is what you will eat in nourishment for the next year. Just
Wow.
trust me. And so, to answer your question, I really don't think you can simplify until you actually learn how to trust in the Lord.
Yeah, that's really good. So I feel like there are moms that are probably going to hear that and think, well, I can't do that. Like, what is that going to look like? And they're afraid because they don't know what are we going to do? Could you just
Mhm.
share like a little picture of like, what did that year look like for you guys? Like, what were you doing? What was life like?
The sabbatical year?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll give you an example of the last time we did it. It was actually just my son
Mm.
who needed the sabbatical, not my daughter. So she was still doing, because I think at that point she was like in eighth grade. And so she was still doing her lessons, her classes, she was doing all the things she wanted to do. But it was Joe that actually took a sabbatical. And what it looked like for him was we put the brakes on all of the formal math, the formal reading, the formal spelling. I asked him, I said, what do you want to do this year? And he says, I just want to do baseball. And so he played baseball, but everything that we were doing revolved around baseball. And the different games that he was watching, he was still doing math because he was building up his baseball collection card and he was keeping track of his stats as well as his favorite players. And so he was doing all this complicated decimals and percentages and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, it's just, we played a lot of games. He was watching a lot of YouTube videos about how to be a better hitter, a better pitcher, a better catcher. It was all physics.
Mm.
And I wasn't doing any of it. So in a way, when I look back on it, it was very much like an unschooling type of a year, where we just kind of went with what Joe needed. But I literally didn't plan or push anything. And then at the end of the year, when we did start up the following year, he skipped 3 grade levels in math.
Wow.
So we did this his 5th grade year, I think, and he started Algebra 1 his 6th grade year.
Wow.
I did nothing but lean and glean that year. Absolutely nothing. And so, well, I mean, we did a lot, but we didn't do any of the formal work. So, um, maybe thinking of it as an unschooling year or a year where you're just going with what's the terminology nowadays? Interest led,
Yes.
right? Interest led learning. But you literally aren't pushing. You're only doing what it is that they are asking or needing to do. So that's just one example of what one
Yeah.
of our sabbatical years look like.
That's incredible because I feel like one of our biggest fears can be as homeschool moms, like, what if they get behind? Well, I can't do
Hmm.
that because they'll get behind. Right. And
Hmm.
so it's so interesting to hear that you actually had the opposite experience with your son, which is really encouraging. Because sometimes we can feel like that for a day. Like if we do
Hmm.
just mess up this one day, they're going to get behind, or this week or this month. So that's really encouraging. So thinking about Sabbath as like the foundation, and then it's kind of interesting because jumping all the way ahead to the end, then you start to talk about keeping the end in mind, like starting with the end in mind. So can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yes, you definitely. When I meet with moms and they're starting to homeschool, the first question they ask me is, "What curriculum should I use?"
Hmm.
And that's actually the last question you should be asking. So when you start to homeschool or when you're planning a new year, or especially when you're starting the high school years, you really should be asking, why are we homeschooling in the first place? You really should know your why first, because once you really understand why the Lord has called you home, right? Or why you feel like home education is the best thing for your family, the answer to that question is then going to help you make all of the rest of the important decisions. So knowing your why will help you figure out, should we join that co-op or not?
Hmm.
Should we use this curriculum or not? Does it fit in with the why? Should we be taking this class? Does it fit in with the reason why we're homeschooling, our ultimate goals? So that's why I always say plan with the end in mind and work your way back. And in the book, I quote one of my favorite coaches, Yogi Berra, where he says, if you don't know where you're going, you're going to definitely end up someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have some sort of idea as to what you want the end goal to look like when you launch them out into the world, they're going to miss the mark. So you really should know what the mark is first before you start the homeschooling journey.
Right. You have to have a target.
You got to have a target.
I love that. And I love the way you explained it because I can be a little bit of like, it's funny that I have the wild and free shirt on, but I can be a very, like my husband says it about me all the time. I am a little bit of a free spirit. Like I'm a little bit of a procrastinator. I am very productive, but it's a little unconventional, and I don't like too many plans, right?
Mhm.
But I think the way you described it, where it's like, no, it's not about like planning out exactly what they're going to be taking in their 11th grade year when they're 4, but it's just having an end goal, your purpose, your vision in mind before you start. That's really good. I really like that.
Yeah.
Oh, thinking about the Sabbath as foundational, thinking about having the end in mind. And then you talk about inviting others in. So I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about that, because another thing about me, this is like exposing myself day or something, is I can be a little bit like picky and almost like, I don't want to use the word controlling because it sounds so negative. And I think it might be because I like my older 2 kids went to school and I
Mhm.
experienced that. And I'm like, no, 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 I'm in charge now. You know what I mean? So I definitely am interested to hear more about this.
Yes, definitely. There's a whole chapter in the book about inviting others along on the journey. And the main reason for that is because, the Lord doesn't send us out to do this on our own. I mean, that the whole reason for church is to be in community, right? And so when you homeschool, you really shouldn't be doing this alone. You really shouldn't be doing it as a lone ranger. And I totally understand, because most moms like you and me, part of the reason we homeschool is because we are a little rebellious. And
Yeah.
we look and we go, but I know it could be done better,
Mhm.
right? And so we kind of have this little spirit inside of us that says, no, I know better. I think it can be done a better way. And like you said, not that we're control freaks, but it is hard for us to ask for help,
Mhm.
especially if we have critics. So if you told family or friends that you were going to homeschool, or you took your kids out of school and the teachers or the school district kind of gave you like this, you're doing what kind of a deal,
Right.
um, and things aren't going quite the way you thought they were going to go, it really keeps us from wanting to go and ask for help, because in a way we feel like we're admitting defeat. And actually, when homeschooling is hard, it doesn't mean we're doing it wrong.
Mhm.
It just means that it's challenging, right? Okay.
Right.
So I spend this whole chapter talking about inviting others along for the ride. I mean, even Jesus sent out his disciples to preach in twos, right? And
Yeah.
Moses had his Aaron, and Martha had her Mary, and David had his Jonathan. We aren't expected to do this on our own. And so obviously the first place to start is, if you're married, to make sure your husband is on the same page with you. And he doesn't have to do any of the teaching. My husband told me from the get-go, he was like, I'm not teaching a thing. That's all you. Just let me know how I can support you in that, right? But there are some dads who want to be hands-on, right? So definitely invite your spouse along in any way he feels comfortable and equipped to do it. Okay. Usually the dads get more involved once they get older, because they start doing things that the dads really want to teach them about, finances and cars and
Right.
all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Um, but also don't forget about the in-laws and the family members.
Mhm.
If you've got that aunt who is like a super gardening freak, or she has chickens, she's got a chicken farm,
Yes.
get auntie involved, right? Even if you have like a mother-in-law like I did, who wasn't 100%, supportive or on board with our decision, I actually asked her to help us out in different areas. So she taught my kids cursive because her handwriting was so beautiful. And then eventually she became known as our field trip coordinator, because whenever I needed a Sabbath, I would call grandma and say, hey, grandma, those zoo passes you have? Can you take the kids to the zoo today?
Yes.
And she wind up becoming a 110% supporter of homeschooling,
Wow.
because she saw the fruit and the blessings that come with home education, right? And so it actually helped turn her opinion around
Wow.
by trying to involve them, instead of always being like, well, I know you don't agree, but you know what I mean? And then mentors. youth group leaders, coaches, outside teachers, senseis. Just get other people involved, especially in the middle school and the high school years, that can speak truth into your kids.
Yeah.
Because yes, we are the primary teacher. We are the ones who are there for them. But when they get to a certain age, it is very helpful for them to see other godly men or godly women um, making decisions for Christ, right? And then even better, if they're doing a profession that they might be interested in, that they could come alongside them. And so that's what I mean by invite others along for the ride. Just
Yeah.
bring people in. But like you said, we have the ability to be choosy and
Yeah.
picky
Yeah.
as to who we also invite in. So if we notice that there's this really great kid that we would love for our son to be friends with,
Mhm.
invite that child over a lot, right? But if we also see that maybe our daughter's gravitating towards someone that we don't feel like might be good for her, we can also make decisions that can kind of limit the exposure of those things. So, it kind of goes both ways when I talk about inviting others along for the ride.
Yeah, that's really good, especially if there are people who are apprehensive. Maybe they had a bad experience with teachers or coaches or family members or whatever it may be, like keeping in mind that you still have an aspect of control, right? Like you are the person that God has put in your child's life to watch over them and to shelter them and to be the gatekeeper, but that doesn't mean other people can't come alongside you and be a huge support and even, support you, support the kids, support their faith. So I love that you talked about like youth leaders and then the teen years, because that has been huge for my boys, especially my oldest son. His youth leader has been with him since he was in sixth grade and has been like really pivotal in those years. Even today, like going to the lake, my dad teaching my kids all about the different kinds of fish that they were catching. I'm like, they just learned about I don't know what fish those are. You know what I mean? As they're catching them. And we got to see a bald eagle's nest because my stepmother wanted to take us on like a little paddling adventure on the other side of the lake. And so, yeah, we don't necessarily have to like hand our kids over, but we can have people come alongside. So I love that. You shared a Mark Twain motto that you said that you really love in your book. Can you share that with us and talk a little bit about it?
You bet. I'm a Southern girl, and so I absolutely love Mark Twain, everything that he's written. But one of his quotes was actually my homeschool motto, and
Mhm.
it was never let schooling get in the way of your education. And so when things would get chaotic or hairy, or it was, like one of those weeks and I just couldn't figure out what was going on or what was going wrong, I would go back to that quote and it never failed because usually what was happening was I was overcomplicating our homeschooling and I was focusing more on the home schooling and not the home education, right? And so that's what I mean by never let school get in the way of education. Even if you are a traditional type homeschooler and you like to, you know, uh, follow the standards and have textbooks for different grade levels, that's fine too. But keeping in mind, we don't want to do school at home. There's a reason we chose not to go that route. And so the last thing we want to do is replicate in our homes the very thing we're trying to get away from, right? And I find that because of the freedom and flexibility we have in home education, we don't need to set up our lives and our schedules and our calendars and our space even
Right.
to follow exactly what school did. And so that's why I love that quote because it reminds me that okay, is everything chaotic and there's no peace and joy because all we're doing is checklist, 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 school, 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 standard, standard, standards? Or when I sit back and say, no, actually, everything that we've done this week, from the chores to the errands to visiting grandpa at the hospital and the few math pages we did, all of that was education. And the
Mhm.
kids were learning whether they were actually sitting at a desk with a workbook. And
Yeah.
so That's what I talk about when I bring up Mark Twain.
I love that so much because I do like curriculum. I use curriculum. I definitely say I'm probably more unschoolish because
Mhm.
you know everybody has like their definitions of like what constitutes if you're a Charlotte Mason or an unschooler or whatever it may be. But
Uh-huh.
I would definitely say we lean towards the unschooling side of things, but we do use curriculum. Um, but I feel like we can, like, especially if we went to traditional school growing up, myself, and I think many other homeschool moms that I've talked to have been teachers at some point. We can tend to not realize, unless we're really intentional about doing it, that there are many other ways to learn. Like people learned before curriculum existed.
Mhm.
For thousands of years, people learned stuff, you know, like they could do math and they figured out how to read and you know, they learned science.
Parted the stars.
Right, right. Lots of things
Go figure.
without curriculum, you know, like lots of those geniuses that we look up to were not taught from a textbook. While if they're a useful tool, great, like you mentioned, I'm not saying they're wrong to use. If it's working, wonderful, but it's not the only way that kids learn. So I love that. It also reminded me, I think it's John Holt, and I'm paraphrasing, who said it's not that school or home is a better school than schools. It's that it's not a school at all.
Mhm.
So you also have a whole chapter dedicated to putting the home back in homeschooling.
The whole premise behind that chapter, and it isn't, the people think that homeschoolers are weird because we never leave the home. That's not what I'm talking about, right? So I'm talking about this idea of mamas, we doubt ourselves and we don't think that we're good enough or smart enough and that we have to have some sort of credential or some sort, we have to be an expert in order to teach our kids at home. And so, what we tend to do when we start to feel that way is we start, quote unquote, farming our kids out. And they, I can't teach him math, so he's going to take a math class with this person. And oh, I hate science. I was never good at science, so I'm going to put him in this online class for this science and history. Oh my gosh, that was my least favorite. So I'm going to put him in this co-op class that I know of over here. And what happens is because we self-doubt ourselves and we don't think that God hired the right person to be our kids' mom and teacher, that would be us. Um, we start farming our kids out, and we feel like other people are the experts, not us. And
Right,
we really are. The day we became a parent was the day we became our child's first, best, and primary teacher. Nobody knows our kids better than we do. So we may not be an expert in calculus or an expert in chemistry, but we're an expert on our kids. And
yeah.
that's all we really need to know. And so that's what I talk about, keeping the home in your home education, and that don't feel like you have to have other people, other experts teach your kids most of the stuff. Do as much as you possibly can or want to all together at home. Even if you have kids like you, ranging from the little guys all the way up to seniors, to
Yeah,
try and incorporate that one room schoolhouse as much as you can for as long as you can, because you really can save time and save money and build connections and relationships. If you do learn your Bible and your history and your science, those are the easy ones, the art and the music all
right,
together. And then they go off and maybe do their independent math, or if they're, a little bit older, their independent writing, or maybe, they do go to a math tutor for something, but you're not self-doubting yourself so much and God's calling on your life to be your child's teacher that you're handing over everything to what you consider to be experts. That's what I talk about with that.
I love that so much because I think for me, the one area that I feel like I have to hand over at a certain point is math. Math has
Mhm.
never been my strength. And I think like how you mentioned, like if there's one thing, you know, or maybe there's two, I don't know if there's a magic number, but keeping the core of why you're doing it like all together. And that's very much what we do. I know people like some people are like, oh, that's interesting because my oldest is 16 years old and my youngest is 4, but we still do gather most days for and I say most days because we didn't today because we gathered at the lake, but if we're sitting down to do it, then we're doing it together. And then that's what we do. We branch off and when my kids get to a certain age, they've either had, a video teacher, which their lesson is in video form, and I look for
Mhm.
my answer key, and that is really the extent of me overseeing their math. But I love just the reminder that where we might need that in one area, we don't need that in all areas. Chapter 12 is called Less is More.
Mhm.
It almost makes me laugh because I feel like, especially this time of year, we can be bombarded as homeschool moms, right? Like everything is back to school, back to homeschool, right? And I was thinking, like, the school supplies when your kids go to like regular school can get insane. Like, and I feel like it gets worse every year. It's like a scavenger hunt all across your town trying to find like a specific color folder. And it can end up being hundreds of dollars and all of that, which is insane. But I feel like we can almost get caught up in a similar
Mhm.
situation as homeschool moms, thinking like we need every new curriculum, every new gadget, every new math manipulative, and everything else. So, talk to us a little bit and encourage us and help us so we can stop spending all of our money. A little bit about this idea of less is more.
Yeah, we could spend a whole entire podcast series
Mm,
just on the idea of less is more, because it does sound like an oxymoron, but we really can overcomplicate this home education thing. And truly, if we keep it simple and we focus on the idea of less is more, you will get more done. And I'm not saying being lazy, not doing any work, but not planning so much. What we tend to do is we plan, especially this time of the year, all these things we're going to do. And then come October 1st, we're like, oh no, I overplanned. And you start scaling back and you start, you're like, oh, we can't use this curriculum. I over, all of that kind of stuff. So what I talk about with less is more, I actually did a whole 2-hour digital course just on how to incorporate this idea of less is more. And I think it starts mainly with the question, do I need curriculum for that? So
mm,
if you start first off with, do I really need curriculum for that? And if your answer is yes, then great. Go get the curriculum that fits your family's schedule and style, right? And budget.
and budget, yeah.
But yes, but a lot of times the answer to that question can be no. Like, we don't really need a curriculum for art. We don't really need a curriculum for history. We could read our way through history, or we don't really need a formal curriculum for science. We could, go on nature studies and things like that. So it depends on your family and your why. Why are you homeschooling in the first place? But when you're trying to incorporate this idea of less is more, is when they're younger, to really just focus on the 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and relationships. That's what you've got to focus on, and everything else is going to come up. They're going to learn by playing, by being read to. You really don't have to focus on anything more than that. And then as they get older, like when it comes to language arts, just focus on one thing each year. You don't have to do all of it. You don't have to do spelling and vocabulary and writing and reading comprehension and grammar you don't have to do it every year, every single year. Pick one area each year that each child maybe has a weakness in or could be better at. And that's what you focus on that year. Maybe it is building their vocabulary. Maybe it is building up their writing skills, but just focus on that one area. And then when it comes to math, even if you use a traditional textbook, they're very cyclical and they go through the same skills every single year. That even in math, if you step back and depending on their age and their skill level, maybe this year you just need to focus on multiplication. And yeah, they're going to use their textbook, but when things get hairy or you start running out of time, do you really need to do the chapter on graphing? Probably not. Do you really need to do the chapter on probability? Probably not. You know what I mean? So if you have this mindset of what important foundational skills in math and language arts and whatever else is important to you, that's what you focus on, and just trust that everything else is going to come along through the read aloud and through the field trips and through the days at the lake with grandpa. And if they don't learn it, then perhaps that wasn't on God's agenda this year anyway.
It's so
And
good.
they learn it next year.
Right.
Yeah.
right. I think something that someone mentioned to me. So I allowed my 16-year-old in the middle of this past year to stop doing traditional math curriculum. He had gotten this to a certain point where, and I know not everyone will agree with this, and that's totally fine. He got to a certain point where it really didn't have any more real life application whatsoever. And he would start asking me, like, when am I ever going to use this? And we know that there are certain things that they'll say that, and you're like, no, 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 you actually will use this, or it's likely that you'll use this. But I looked at him and I said, honestly, I don't think ever. Like I had to admit, right? And so we had some conversations about like, so what do we do for math? And he was like, I really just want to, if I'm going to do math, can I do something that I can actually use? Like that I'm actually going to use. And I've had a couple people say things like, well, you do actually use that. Or what if he wanted to go into this field? And I'm like, guess what? If he wants to go into that field, then he can learn that type of math when
When he
he's going
gets,
to that field. Because we
Mhm.
can't learn all the things. We can't possibly learn the foundations of every field out there in case we want to go into that,
Into it.
right?
Mhm.
It's just not realistic. So while we do need to have basic foundations in place, I don't think we need to go so deep into every discipline that you could possibly be an expert in that if you want to be, right? And it goes
Mhm.
back to like if they were meant to learn it or not. Like if it's not your gifting, then you're probably never going to be an expert at it anyway.
Or maybe they're not ready for it this year.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, maybe next year or the year after. It's like the scrubbing of the dishes. You can sit there and drill and drill and drill, but if they're not ready to learn it, you're just going to beat your head against the wall, and so is your kid. But if you step back a couple of months or a year and try it again, lo and behold, all of a sudden it's easier to learn the skill or to clean those plates.
It's funny you say that because I heard something recently about like preschoolers and even 3-year-olds in whatever preschool they call that being drilled for their
Mhm.
letters, right? Drilled for letter sounds, just drilled, 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 drilled. And then the thought of like, well, if you just waited a couple years till they were ready, like you actually just wouldn't need to drill them at all. And you wouldn't need to spend all day quizzing them and flashcarding them and figuring out a million ways to get them to understand that A says and it's so, so true. Like maybe they're just not there yet. So
Mhm.
that's really, I feel like that's a really important thing for moms to remember too. Like if it's just not clicking, then maybe it's not time yet.
Right.
That's definitely a strong possibility. So that's really good. At the end of your book, you talk about our ultimate job description. I just feel like this would be such an important thing to touch on before we go today, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about that.
Yep, and it's the shortest chapter in the book. Because our ultimate job description is not to be teacher of the year, and it's not to be the best parent out there. Our ultimate job description is to be a faithful disciple. And God has called us to be our kids' mom. And if you're homeschooling, He has called us to be their teacher. That's our ultimate job description, is to be faithful in that calling. So I basically talk about how we just need to show up, even if we're tired because we didn't take our Sabbath, or we're tired because we're sick, or in the middle of a move. It doesn't matter. God calls us to show up and to trust that wherever our holes are, our weaknesses are, He's going to fill in the gaps. So that's our ultimate job description. Do what God's called you to do.
Yeah, it's such a good reminder because we can get so caught up in trying to be all of the things.
All the things.
So that's such a
I don't
good
want to be all the things.
point. Oh man.
Yep.
So I could sit and talk with you all day, and I'm sure that I am not the only mom that's like, I have a billion more questions for Carrie, and I want so much more of her story. So, what's the best place for moms to connect with you? Where can they find you if they're like, I need more of this?
Well, the best place to go is my website. So www.coffeewithcarrie.org. And that will bring you pretty much to everything else. But you can get my books either at my website or Amazon. Like you mentioned earlier, every Thursday I drop a new episode at Coffee with Carrie Homeschool Podcast. And I set it up in such a way that it's like this, where I hope you feel like we're actually sitting at a coffee shop and we're just talking about some topic of homeschooling. And I'm on Instagram and I'm on YouTube right now. A lot of the moms are getting a kick out of my cooking chats where I answer your most frequent questions while I'm cooking up dinner or whatever. But
Yeah.
basically, just go to coffeewithcarrie.org and you can find everything else from there.
Thank you so much. I definitely love your little cooking chats. I've been following along with those, and I am going to be ordering your high school book because I didn't even know that you had that one. I just saw that recently. I'm like, how did I not know she has this? So I will definitely be checking that out. Well, thank you so much
Good.
for meeting with me today, and I hope to get to talk with you again really soon.
Me too. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today for the Rooted Home Life podcast. I hope you'll join me next time as I sit down with another homeschooling mama to continue our conversation about cultivating home and chasing adventure with our children. Until next time, stay rooted.